had this little moment on February 21st of this year when I saw this sign up over this building in Friday Harbor. And it actually wasn't there, but it was in my mind. But it also said, location, location. This place is available. And it was at the time I wouldn't call it a junk store, but it was a collectible store. It was the kind of thing that I go in and get stuff that I don't need. Yeah, I see it's trimming off some of the stuff, but we can see that it had this for rent sign. And I thought, So I talked to the guy, and he was moving out in about 3 days. This is March 3rd when he finally got everything out and started sweeping the floor. And in the meantime, I had called the number on the for rent sign. And I took his boxes of shelves that he left in there and framed up kind of a floor plan. And I didn't realize at the time that under all that collectible stuff was a floor. But I had a carpenter friend that was available. He didn't have anything to do that particular winter, so we just went in there, and he's an amazing craftsman. It's like I couldn't have done better if I'd had Michelangelo come and work on it. It's just phenomenal. He, in a matter of a few weeks, put together, if you've been there, you know, and if you haven't, you should. Basically, it's the new office for the Orca Education. Already been mentioned as being very helpful to many causes, and she was very excited about this project. And Katie Jones, that is basically organizing all the naturalists and the volunteers. Actually, the amount of support in the community is just amazing. But the idea was this, that basically, I think we know enough from the research that's been done on these whales to know that it's long past the time to act. We got to do something. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to have a public outreach and education. And we're trying to think of a name. You've probably eaten up at the Hungry Clam, the little restaurant, which is up from it. We're going to call it the Hungry Whale. Yeah, but maybe some people wouldn't go for that, I don't know. But we call it the Orca Survey Outreach and Education Center, but that's a lot of words. And so I was going to call it the Orcinus Orca Outreach Office. We'll just, the acronym will be whatever. We try and tell each other where we're going when we're all going over to the office, and we all have a different name for it. But it's there at 185 South 1st Street, and it's open to everybody. It's free. It's information. We'd love it if you become a member or get a button. Make a donation if you wish. Help it go along. The idea is that we have to provide a very vocal and active constituency for our electeds to get a spine and do something. We gotta be there. Okay, here's some science stuff. All the rest was advertising. As everybody knows, we've been photo identifying these whales since 1976, and we had almost 100 individuals at one point. And then it took a steep decline, and then they were declared endangered, and then our society is supposed to do something about it. And we basically studied it. We kept studying it. And I'm not against study, because that's what I do myself, but we've learned enough. Now we know that, first of all, they do have to eat. I mean, that's clearly obvious. And now we know that they're not getting enough to eat, and we know that most of what they eat is Chinook salmon. The number currently, July 1st this year, was 75 living individuals. And I hope that, I mean, this is what the government uses as its number of what the status is. We, of course, have detail on all individuals that were born and when, and all the individuals that died and when, what year. And again, this is as of July 1st. Now, some of you may wonder, why July 1st? That's a weird year. I mean, it's not a tax year. It's not a federal fiscal year or whatever. But the idea was, in the early years of the study, most of the calves in both the northern and the southern resident community of killer whales, orca, were born during winter months. We would do the identification work May to September, when the weather was generally nice and the whales were generally around. It wasn't very efficient in the winter because they were only here a few times a month, and the weather was sometimes not too good when they were here. But the calves would be born in the winter. And there was some logic to this, biological logic, that during times of great prey abundance, when the Chinook salmon were running in to this area, for largely the Fraser River and the Skagit River, but also other rivers in the area, that was when food was plentiful and they were having parties all the time, and they were getting pregnant. And 17 months later, they'd give birth, and that would be in the winter, a year and a half away from that summer. And the actual final stages of gestation would occur during the following summer, when there was a lot of food again. So, you know, it was no big deal in the first trimester or whatever of gestation for them to go through a winter and, you know, basically not have as much food supply as they had had in summer months and fall months. And by the following year, they would fatten up again, big blubber layer. Then they'd have their calves at the beginning of the winter, and they'd have enough blubber layer to nurse them through the winter and bring them to show us in the summer. That was sort of the plan at first, and most of the babies were born in winter months. This is no longer the case. Anyway, July was picked because usually our count was accomplished by July 1st, and the northern resident count was accomplished by then, and they could compare them directly, you know, rather than having two different time periods for comparison. But of course, media people and everybody else, they think in terms of a calendar year. So we'll come up with, you know, like it's sort of embarrassing in some ways to say that, you know, when somebody says, oh, well, there's 77 of them. Well, that was a December 31st number, you know, and now we've lost a couple, and now we're down to 75. And this makes a little more sense in terms of dealing with media as to sort of in a calendar year. So that's why you'll see, like in January 2016, there was a calf born, J55, but within a couple of weeks it was dead. So, you know, we count them if we've got a picture of them, and we don't count if we don't have a picture of them. So there are undoubtedly, we know about 3/4 of the calves that are going through the gestation process are aborted or neonate perinatal mortalities. And unfortunately, in the late term mortalities, the mother is often affected. So much for the bad news, or the actually it's just biology. This is kind of, imagine this is a family tree of humans grandma or great-grandma, grandma, mom, and calves. The red boxes here are reproductive age females, and the solid blue boxes are the reproductive age males. And the little empty boxes here are tombstones of whales that have passed away from natural or unnatural causes. If they're not there, they're not going to be in your family album right now. Anyway, so we look at J-pod and we see 9 adult females, and there are 4 of them that have actually been producing calves. And we have 4 young females, that's the pink ones. Oops, I pushed the wrong button. Oh, I went way back. Sorry. Okay, red button. Anyway, the pink ones are the ones that are potentially gonna grow up and reproduce themselves. And of course, we keep hoping that happens. And as you may know, this one right now is having a little bit of trouble. She's following behind the pod and starting to develop the peanut head. Here's K-pod. We have 6 adult females. All of them are non-producing except for K27. And there's 1 young female, K43, up here that will hang our hopes on for K-pod. And notice there's a whole bunch of young males, 7 young males, that way outnumber the females. Why we're getting a biased sex ratio in the young ones, we don't know, but it could be the toxins. We know that PCB does have a bias toward male offspring. And then we'll take L-pod here. We can scratch this one off. This chart was made before he passed away. But again, we have 6 of the 11 adult females are not producing. We have 4 young ones that may grow up, and we have plenty of young males that may grow up. But basically, we can back one up here. This particular group that we call the L54s, even though these 2 males came from different major lines, they now swim with this matriarch. They're hanging out at the entrance of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and they don't come in very much. But we do know from the Canadian DFO studies just occurring that they're out there. They're still alive, so they're in the July 1st count. But there's no potential. Guys don't have babies. They can father calves, but there is no reproductive capacity there. Oh, that's cute. Yeah. And so we can, not look to the future on that one in particular. We can also not look to the future on this group in particular for the same reason as males. And up here, there's not much happening there. It's all males and females that are about to be post-reproductive. So L-pod is there's not a whole lot of future, and they're the ones that are feeding more on the coast. J-pod was always more interior, L-pod was more coastal, and K-pod went back and forth. And that was the way it always was and still is. So this is a little faded out looking, at least from my point of view. But basically, you've seen this chart before, where from 1976 up until 2016, we're supposed to add 2017, and then eventually we'll add 2018 data as we get it. But usually the fishery data is a couple years in being cross-checked and everything before it's released. But we did notice when we have a lot of fish, a lot of Chinook salmon in particular, 5, 6, 7 million, that the mortality in the southern resident population is lower. These are mortality bars. The longer the bar, the more individuals have passed away in that year. And when we have low years, that we have higher mortality bars. These colors represent the different river systems which are along the side here. And this is, for example, We had, well, I'll go over to this example. This example here. This is the California system. They had a couple of good years in 2000, 2004 range. And this was the first year when we started noticing the southern residents going as far as California. They may have done it before, but we had K and L pods down there in these years, and not in the years in which that was not doing well. Here we have the Columbia system, and over here we have the this would be the BC coastal systems. Anyway, what we've done is figure that if there's about 4 million adult Chinook salmon in the eastern North Pacific and all these river systems, that there's enough food that it reduces the mortality. And we've also now published that the birth rate also is increased when we have more fish. So it works in both directions. So our local system here is the Fraser, and this is this year's Fraser count. It's an index of the number of Chinook salmon that are caught in a test fishery. And so it's not a total abundance, but it shows you relative to the different years, and they're color-coded along here. Incidentally, Jane Cogan has put all these graphs together for us. She's just a wizard at this stuff. But it's a very poor year so far, and last year was a poor year. And that corresponds to the very poor birth rates. We know when they leave here that we counted up the number of days from photographs that whales were in other areas, and we'd see the San Francisco Monterey Bay area showing up, Northern California coast, maybe this is Klamath, Oregon coast, probably the Oregon coast rivers, and Washington coast, BC coast, and once in a while they go up to Alaska, but not very often. So we started looking for where are the fish? Where are we going to find some Chinook salmon? And these are the various stocks. Now each one of these dots represents a river system for which Jane has laboriously gone through all the years of the study and the current data to see what's the status of the Chinook stocks and how many fish are in each of those rivers, or what their potential could be. Basically, we can look at this stuff up in the Canadian area is really DFO's region. We can go and yell at them and stuff, but getting them to do anything is pretty hard. And if we take this area, this is California's responsibility, but basically, you know, this core area, which is a larger core area than currently designated as their critical habitat, but this is something we can do about. The governor has already said that southern resident killer whales are high on the priority to keep around, and has set up a task force to do this. And we look at the salmon recovery regions that the state has. You know, we've focused a lot on Hood Canal and Puget Sound area, the core area, and this is where the fishermen are and the voters. And so there's a lot of attention paid to this. And out here you have the trollers, and there's some attention paid to that. This one over here you kind of wonder about. They didn't really make a big area on the map for it, but this is actually the most important system numerically for Chinook in the whole feeding range of these whales. And take it in terms of production. It's interesting that Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, if you go back to the '76 numbers, they proudly announce every year how many more fish they caught than last year. And it's all based on harvest. You know, that's your big story, is how much money can you make on these? Anyway, so these various regions got designated. They're not necessarily making any sense in terms of the river systems, but as I pointed out, we've looked at all the river systems and we're finding the best one to do. And in my view, from the whale's point of view, the Snake River offers the greatest potential for food resources for these whales. So we went out and got a credit card and we tried to get $1 million limit on it, but we can't get that. But we're gonna focus on this one. And we have this little movie. If we have Steve Hawley and Michael Peterson here. Thanks to the Milgard Foundation, the Ruth Foundation, and the Milgard Family Foundations, they have gotten behind this idea of, okay, if you say that's where we got to get the food, let's go get it. And Steve and Michael here, I'd like to play the movie here and then let you answer, if you will, although actually I don't see a play button on here. Well, we got to play the movie. Let's see. That was the one thing that I was worried about in terms of putting this thing here, is whether or not, oh, there we go. Thank you, Kelly. Here you go. Oh, now we have to put sound.
Southern resident killer whales are literally starving to death. We know enough. We know to live. 80% of their diet was Chinook salmon, the big fish.
Millions of salmon used to come to Stanley every year. Now to call like 5,000 salmon a good year, it's just ridiculous.
I cannot find a situation that shows that lower snake dams are needed at any level whatsoever.
I'd like to say before actually the three of us then will try and answer questions when the time's done, but there is a governor's task force set up, as I mentioned, but it appears to me that it's a process, much like what we just heard about these other processes, trying to get things pushed through for welfare of captive animals. These are wild animals, and trying to push through agenda for their welfare is meeting just this huge resistance with process. I'm sorry to say, but it's like, the first thing that they're coming out with is, oh, there's 3 causes. There's vessels and toxins and prey. Well, bullshit, there's prey. And there's 4 H's. There's harvest, there's hatcheries, there's hydropower, and habitat. Bullshit. There are 5 dithers, and they dither at every opportunity. The court has told them that they have to fix this system, and they do not. So, how'd you guys get involved?
Stephen Hawley wrote a book called Recovering a Lost River, and about 4 years ago he said there's a chapter in this book that I think we should bring to life in a film. And mainly focusing on 4 obsolete fish-killing dams that are 1,000 miles from here. They're basically affecting the food supply for the southern residents, and that's how we got started on this. There's a 5th H.
Yeah, well, Hoover's?
No, horse shit.
Horse shit. 6 of them. Yeah, Hoover's is high.
Yep, very high.
Yeah, well, anyway, I thank you all, and I guess if anybody has any questions, if we have time, try to cut it a little short here, because Jim Waddell will be our next speaker, and he can